The Pacific War between the United States and the Empire of Japan, spanning from December 1941 to August 1945, represented one of history's most brutal and expansive military conflicts. Within this vast theater of operations, the United States Marine Corps emerged as a formidable amphibious assault force that would conduct some of the war's most costly and strategically significant campaigns. The Japanese military, particularly its Imperial Army and naval forces, developed specific assessments and tactical responses to American marine operations as the conflict progressed. Understanding what Japanese commanders actually thought about U.S. Marines requires examining primary source documents, post-war interviews, captured intelligence reports, and the tactical adaptations Japanese forces implemented in response to Marine Corps operations. Prior to the outbreak of hostilities, Japanese military planners had limited direct experience with the United States Marine Corps as a combat force. Japanese intelligence services had studied American military capabilities throughout the 1930s, but their primary focus remained on the U.S. Navy and Army. The Marine Corps, though it had existed since 1775 and had conducted numerous small wars and interventions throughout the early 20th century, was not widely recognized by Japanese strategists as the specialized amphibious warfare force it would become. Japanese military doctrine in the pre-war period emphasized offensive operations and spiritual superiority, concepts deeply rooted in Bushido philosophy, and the belief that Japanese forces possessed inherently superior fighting spirit compared to Western militaries. This ideological framework would significantly influence how Japanese commanders initially assessed American military capabilities, including those of the Marine Corps. The first major combat engagement between Japanese forces and U.S. Marines occurred during the defense of Wake Island in December 1941. A small Marine garrison of approximately 450 personnel, commanded by Major James Devereux, defended the atoll against Japanese naval and amphibious assault forces. The Marines, supported by a dozen Grumman F-4F Wildcat fighters from Marine Fighter Squadron 211, inflicted unexpectedly heavy casualties on Japanese forces and successfully repelled the initial invasion attempt on December 11, 1941. This marked the first time in the war that a Japanese amphibious assault had been decisively defeated. Japanese forces lost two destroyers, the Hayate and Kisaragi, along with several hundred personnel. The determined marine resistance forced Japanese commanders to commit additional forces, including fleet carriers, to subdue the island. Wake Island finally fell on December 23, 1941, after a two-week defense. Japanese after-action reports from Wake Island noted the effectiveness of marine defensive positions, the accuracy of their coastal artillery fire, and the tenacity of their resistance. However, these early assessments were often contextualized within the framework of Japanese victories across the Pacific, and the eventual Japanese success at Wake Island reinforced existing beliefs about the inevitability of Japanese military superiority. The Battle of Guadalcanal, which began with the 1st Marine Division's landing on August 7, 1942, fundamentally altered Japanese perceptions of American marine capabilities. Major General Alexander Vandergrift's division conducted the first major American offensive operation of the Pacific War, seizing the strategically vital Henderson Field airstrip on Guadalcanal Island in the Solomon Islands chain. The campaign would last 6 months and involve intense jungle warfare, naval battles, and repeated Japanese attempts to recapture the island. Japanese commanders initially underestimated both the size and capability of the Marine force on Guadalcanal. Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake, commander of the Japanese 17th Army, received intelligence suggesting that only about 2,000 American troops had landed on the island, when in fact approximately 11,000 Marines comprised the initial landing force. This intelligence failure led Japanese commanders to commit forces piecemeal in what they believed would be straightforward counterattacks to drive the Americans back into the sea. The Battle of the Tenarue River, which occurred on August 21, 1942, provided Japanese commanders with a brutal lesson in marine defensive capabilities. Colonel Kayonao Ichiki led approximately 900 Japanese soldiers in a night assault against marine positions along the Ilu River, which American forces mistakenly identified as the Tenaru River. Ichiki, a veteran of combat in China and Manchuria, had explicit orders from higher command to recapture the airfield quickly. His force, moving at night in column formation, struck prepared marine defensive positions held by the 1st Marine Regiment. The Marines, forewarned by native scouts and possessing superior automatic weapons, including M1919 Browning machine guns, inflicted catastrophic casualties on Ichiki's force. Of the approximately 900 Japanese soldiers in the assault, Fewer than 130 survived. Colonel Ichiki, following the Code of Bushido, after recognizing the magnitude of his defeat, burned his regimental colors and committed suicide. Survivors, who eventually made their way back to Japanese lines, reported the devastating effectiveness of coordinated Marine machine gun fire, artillery support, and the discipline of Marine infantry in maintaining their positions under night assault. These reports began to filter through Japanese command structures, though they were often received with skepticism by officers who had not yet faced American forces in sustained combat. Japanese tactical doctrine throughout much of the China campaigns and early Pacific operations emphasized the supremacy of spirit over material, the effectiveness of night attacks to negate enemy firepower advantages, and the use of cold steel in close combat through bayonet charges. These tactics had proven effective against Chinese nationalist forces, which often lacked the training, equipment, and unit cohesion to withstand determined night assaults. Marine forces on Guadalcanal, however, possessed several advantages that Japanese commanders had not fully anticipated. American Marines underwent significantly more rigorous training than the average Army infantry unit, with particular emphasis on marksmanship, small unit tactics, and maintenance of discipline under fire. Marines were equipped with the semi-automatic M1 Garand rifle, which provided substantially greater firepower than the bolt-action weapons issued to most other nations' infantry forces. American artillery support, coordinated through forward observers and increasingly sophisticated fire control procedures, could deliver devastating concentrations of high-explosive and white phosphorus rounds with relatively short response times. Additionally, Marine units maintained stricter fire discipline than many other forces, with standing orders to challenge unknown personnel approaching their lines rather than immediately opening fire, which helped prevent both friendly fire incidents and premature disclosure of defensive positions. The Battle of Edson's Ridge, also known as the Battle of the Bloody Ridge, which took place on September 12–14, 1942, further demonstrated Marine defensive capabilities to Japanese commanders. Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi led approximately 6,000 Japanese soldiers in a coordinated assault against a key ridgeline south of Henderson Field, defended by approximately 840 Marines and Paramarines under the command of Colonel Merritt Edson. Kawaguchi's plan called for multiple columns to converge on the Marine positions in a night attack. Overwhelming the defenders through superior numbers and aggressive close combat, the battle became a chaotic, close-quarters engagement fought largely in darkness and heavy rain. Marines, despite being heavily outnumbered and forced to contract their perimeter multiple times, maintained cohesion and continued to deliver effective small arms and artillery fire throughout the night. Colonel Edson moved continuously among his men, personally directing fire and repositioning units to meet each Japanese assault. By the morning of September 14th, Japanese forces had suffered approximately 1,200 casualties and failed to break through the Marine defensive line. General Kawaguchi later reported to his superiors that American forces had fought with unexpected determination and that Japanese tactics of infiltration and night assault had proven less effective than anticipated against well-trained, disciplined troops equipped with superior automatic weapons and supported by responsive artillery. As the Guadalcanal campaign continued through late 1942 and early 1943, Japanese commanders began producing more detailed tactical assessments of Marine capabilities. Captured Japanese documents from this period reveal a growing respect for American firepower and combined arms coordination, though often expressed through the lens of criticism toward their own forces for insufficient spiritual preparation or tactical execution. A Japanese intelligence summary from November 1942 noted that American Marines demonstrated superior marksmanship compared to expectations, particularly with rifle fire at ranges beyond 200 meters. The document acknowledged that Japanese infantry tactics developed for fighting in China, which emphasized close combat and bayonet charges, were proving costly against American forces that could maintain effective fire discipline and deliver concentrated automatic weapons fire at close range. The summary recommended that Japanese forces increase their use of indirect fire weapons, improve concealment of approach routes during attacks, and conduct more thorough reconnaissance before launching assaults. Notably, the document did not recommend abandoning the night attack tactic entirely, but rather emphasized the need for better preparation and coordination of such attacks. The experiences at Guadalcanal began to influence Japanese defensive doctrine, as the strategic situation in the Pacific shifted from Japanese offensive operations to an increasingly defensive posture. Following the Allied victory at Guadalcanal in February 1943, Japanese Imperial General Headquarters recognized that American forces, particularly the Marine Corps, were developing increasing proficiency in amphibious assault operations. Japanese military planners began preparing defensive strategies for the numerous island garrisons throughout the Central and South Pacific. These defensive concepts would evolve significantly as Japanese commanders gained more experience fighting American Marines in different operational environments. The Battle of Tarawa, which took place from November 20th to 23, 1943, represented the first American assault against a heavily fortified Japanese defensive position. The 2nd Marine Division, commanded by Major General Julian Smith, conducted an amphibious assault against Bastogne Island in the Tarawa Atoll. Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki commanded approximately 4,500 Japanese defenders, primarily from the Special Naval Landing Forces, often referred to as Japanese Marines and Korean laborers. Shibasaki had spent months preparing Batogne's defenses, constructing an elaborate network of concrete and steel-reinforced bunkers, pillboxes, and gun emplacements. Shibasaki reportedly stated before the battle that it would take the Americans 1,000,000 men 100 years to conquer Tarawa, reflecting the confidence Japanese commanders placed in prepared defensive positions. The battle proved extraordinarily costly, with the 2nd Marine Division suffering approximately 3,400 casualties, including more than 1,000 killed in action during the 76-hour battle. Japanese forces fought virtually to the last man, with only 17 Japanese soldiers and 129 Korean laborers captured from the original garrison. Japanese defensive doctrine at Tarawa emphasized several key principles that would influence subsequent defensive operations. Rather than attempting to stop the American landing at the beach through concentrated fire, which had proven ineffective given the overwhelming American naval gunfire support, Shibasaki positioned his strongest defenses inland from the beach in mutually supporting strongpoints. These positions were designed to survive naval bombardment and aerial attack through the use of massive fortifications built with reinforced concrete, coconut logs, and coral rock. Japanese defenders maintained fire discipline during the initial American approach, waiting until landing craft and amphibious tractors reached the most vulnerable points before opening fire. This tactical patience, combined with the physical obstacles of the reef and seawall, created a killing zone where American forces suffered heavy casualties while attempting to establish their beachhead. The Japanese defenders at Tarawa also demonstrated the effectiveness of pre-registered artillery and mortar fire on likely American assembly areas and approach routes. Despite being heavily outnumbered and cut off from resupply or reinforcement, Japanese forces at Tarawa held their positions with fanatical determination, requiring Marines to systematically reduce each fortified position through the use of flamethrowers, satchel charges, and point-blank tank fire. The Battle of Tarawa had significant influence on both American and Japanese tactical thinking. For American forces, Tarawa demonstrated the need for improved amphibious assault techniques, better naval gunfire support procedures, more effective reconnaissance of landing beaches, and increased use of specialized equipment such as armored amphibious vehicles. For Japanese commanders, Tarawa represented both a tactical success and a strategic failure. While Shibasaki's forces had inflicted heavy casualties on the attacking Marines and demonstrated the effectiveness of in-depth defensive positions, the ultimate American victory revealed that even the most heavily fortified positions could be overcome through the application of overwhelming firepower and the determined assault of highly trained infantry. Japanese intelligence officers studied American tactics at Tarawa closely, noting the effective use of supporting arms, including naval gunfire, close air support, tanks, and flamethrowers in reducing fortified positions. They also observed that American forces were willing to accept heavy casualties in order to achieve their operational objectives, countering the Japanese assumption that American forces lacked the spiritual strength to sustain costly offensive operations. The island-hopping campaign that followed Tarawa saw American forces, primarily Marine Corps divisions and Army divisions, conduct a series of increasingly sophisticated amphibious assaults against Japanese-held islands across the Central Pacific. The battles of Kwajalein, Eniwetok, Saipan, Guam, Tinian, and Peleliu between February 1944 and September 1944 provided Japanese commanders with extensive experience observing Marine Corps amphibious assault techniques and operational capabilities. Each battle generated after-action reports and intelligence summaries from Japanese survivors and captured documents that revealed evolving Japanese assessments of American Marine capabilities. The Battle of Saipan, which lasted from June 15 to July 9, 1944, involved both Marine and Army divisions in a large-scale assault against a strategically vital island in the Mariana Islands chain. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito commanded approximately 30,000 Japanese defenders, facing an American assault force that eventually numbered over 71,000 troops, including the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions and the Army's 27th Infantry Division. Saito's defensive strategy reflected the evolution of Japanese thinking based on previous battles. Rather than attempting to destroy the American landing force at the waterline, Saito positioned his forces to conduct a defense in depth, utilizing the island's mountainous terrain to create multiple defensive lines that American forces would need to systematically reduce. Japanese intelligence assessments from Saipan noted the sophisticated coordination between American ground, naval, and air forces. Marines advancing inland received continuous support from naval gunfire, which could be adjusted rapidly based on requests from forward observers. American aircraft provided close air support missions, attacking Japanese positions that were impeding the Marine advance. Japanese commanders observed that American forces demonstrated increasing proficiency in combined arms warfare, coordinating infantry, armor, artillery, and air assets more effectively than Japanese forces could counter with their limited resources. One significant aspect of Japanese assessments of Marine capabilities concerned American use of armor in amphibious operations. Marine Corps tank battalions, equipped primarily with M4 Sherman medium tanks, provided crucial direct fire support for infantry assault operations. Japanese anti-tank capabilities, particularly on island garrisons with limited heavy weapons, were often inadequate to counter American armor effectively. Japanese commanders noted that American tank infantry coordination, while sometimes uneven in earlier campaigns, improved significantly as the war progressed. Marines developed techniques for infantry to screen tanks against Japanese close assault teams carrying magnetic mines and pole charges, while tanks provided suppressive fire against Japanese fortified positions that pinned down Marine infantry. Japanese intelligence reports from Saipan and subsequent battles recommended that defensive positions include more effective anti-tank obstacles, improved fields of fire for anti-tank guns, and better coordination between anti-tank weapons and infantry positions. However, the resource constraints facing Japanese island garrisons, combined with the increasing American control of sea lanes that prevented delivery of heavy weapons and construction materials, meant that many of these recommendations could not be implemented effectively. The Battle of Peleliu, which lasted from September 15 to November 27, 1944, demonstrated both the evolution of Japanese defensive tactics and the corresponding adaptation of marine assault techniques. Colonel Kunio Nakagawa commanded approximately 10,900 Japanese defenders of Peleliu Island in the Palau Islands chain. Nakagawa, following directives from Japanese Imperial General Headquarters, abandoned the earlier practice of banzai charges and shoreline defenses in favor of a defense in depth, utilizing the island's extensive cave systems and ridgelines. The 1st Marine Division, commanded by Major General William Rupertus, expected to secure the island in 4 days based on intelligence estimates. Instead, the battle became one of the most costly Marine Corps operations of the war relative to the size of the defending force, with the 1st Marine Division suffering over 6,500 casualties. Japanese forces constructed an elaborate system of interconnected caves, tunnels, and fortified positions throughout the Umurbrogol mountain region, later known as the Bloody Nose Ridge. These positions were designed to survive sustained bombardment and to provide interlocking fields of fire that prevented American forces from bypassing strong points. Nakagawa's defensive concept emphasized inflicting maximum casualties on American forces while preserving his own combat power as long as possible, abandoning the earlier emphasis on decisive counterattacks and banzai charges that had proven so costly in previous battles. Japanese tactical assessments from Peleliu revealed sophisticated understanding of Marine Corps assault techniques and corresponding defensive adaptations. Nakagawa's forces noted that American infantry tactics followed predictable patterns, with reconnaissance followed by preparatory fires, then infantry assault supported by tanks and demolition teams. Japanese defenders positioned their strongest positions with overlapping fields of fire that could engage American forces from multiple directions simultaneously, creating kill zones where American supporting arms were less effective due to the complex terrain and proximity of friendly forces to enemy positions. Japanese positions were constructed with multiple firing ports and interconnected tunnels that allowed defenders to shift positions rapidly, making it difficult for American forces to suppress or destroy defensive positions, even with direct fire weapons. The extensive use of reverse slope positions, where Japanese defenders occupied positions on the side of ridgelines facing away from American lines, provided protection. from American artillery and naval gunfire while still allowing Japanese forces to engage American troops as they crested ridgelines. These tactics forced Marine infantry to conduct slow, methodical advances, clearing each position through close combat with grenades, flamethrowers, and demolition charges, resulting in high casualties on both sides. The intelligence value of Peleliu for Japanese commanders lay not only in the tactical lessons learned, but also in the strategic insight it provided regarding American operational planning. Japanese analysts observed that American forces appeared willing to commit substantial resources and accept significant casualties to secure objectives that had been designated as strategically important, even when operational circumstances changed. The strategic value of Peleliu, which was captured primarily to protect the flank of MacArthur's Philippines operations, became questionable even during the battle itself, yet American forces continued the costly operation to completion. This observation led some Japanese strategists to conclude that American operational planning was sometimes inflexible and that American commanders might continue costly operations even when tactical or strategic circumstances suggested alternative approaches might be more effective. However, this assessment failed to account for the larger strategic picture, including American material superiority and the psychological importance of completing initiated operations. As American forces moved closer to the Japanese home islands through 1945, the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa provided Japanese commanders with their final opportunities to observe Marine Corps operations in sustained combat. The Battle of Iwo Jima, which lasted from February 19 to March 26, 1945, involved 3 Marine divisions conducting an assault against approximately 21,000 Japanese defenders commanded by General Tadamichi Kuribayashi. Kuribayashi represented one of the most capable Japanese commanders of the Pacific War, having spent time in the United States before the war and possessing a more realistic assessment of American military capabilities than many of his contemporaries. Kuribayashi's defensive plan for Iwo Jima incorporated lessons learned from previous battles while adapting to the specific terrain and strategic situation of the island. He explicitly forbade banzai charges and shoreline defenses, instead constructing an elaborate system of underground fortifications throughout the island's volcanic terrain. Kuribayashi's forces spent months preparing defensive positions, including hundreds of pillboxes and blockhouses connected by 11 miles of tunnels, all designed to survive sustained bombardment and maximize American casualties. Kuribayashi's assessment of American Marine capabilities, as revealed in his orders and correspondence to his superiors, demonstrated sophisticated understanding of Marine tactics and operational patterns. He recognized that American forces possessed overwhelming superiority in firepower, air support, and naval gunfire support, making any Japanese attempt at mobile defense or counterattack operations futile. Kuribayashi understood that Marines would advance methodically, using combined arms to reduce defensive positions systematically. His defensive concept focused on creating depth in the defense, with multiple defensive lines that would force American forces to fight for every yard of ground. He positioned his strongest defenses inland, particularly around Mount Suribachi in the south and the Central Highlands, where the terrain provided natural defensive advantages that multiplied the effectiveness of prepared positions. Kuribayashi's orders to his troops emphasized that each position should inflict maximum casualties on American forces before being overwhelmed, with no expectation of relief or reinforcement. This represented a fundamental shift from earlier Japanese defensive doctrine, which had emphasized decisive counterattacks and the possibility of victory through superior fighting spirit. Kuribayashi's more realistic assessment recognized that Japanese forces could not defeat the American assault, but could make it as costly as possible, potentially influencing broader strategic calculations about the cost of invading the Japanese home islands. The Battle of Iwo Jima resulted in over 26,000 American casualties, including nearly 7,000 killed in action, making it one of the costliest battles in Marine Corps history. Japanese forces suffered nearly complete annihilation, with fewer than 1,100 of the original 21,000 defenders captured alive. The battle demonstrated both the effectiveness of Kuribayashi's defensive concept and the determination of Marine Corps assault forces to overcome even the most formidable defensive positions. Japanese commanders who studied the battle including those preparing defenses on Okinawa and potentially for the home islands themselves, drew several conclusions about Marine Corps capabilities. American forces had demonstrated the ability to sustain heavy casualties over extended periods while maintaining offensive momentum. Marine Corps combined arms coordination had reached a high level of proficiency, with infantry, armor, artillery, engineers, and supporting arms working in close coordination to reduce defensive positions systematically. American forces showed adaptability in their tactics, developing new techniques such as using tanks equipped with bulldozer blades to seal cave entrances and employing specialized demolition teams to destroy underground positions. The willingness of American forces to use overwhelming firepower, including flamethrower tanks, naval gunfire, and aerial bombardment, demonstrated that American operational doctrine prioritized force protection through firepower rather than accepting additional casualties through more rapid but less supported advances. The Battle of Okinawa, which lasted from April 1st to June 22, 1945, represented the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War and involved both Marine and Army divisions fighting against approximately 110,000 Japanese defenders commanded by Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima. The 10th Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner, included 4 Army divisions and 3 Marine divisions in the assault force. Japanese defensive preparations on Okinawa reflected accumulated experience from previous battles, with extensive fortifications constructed in the southern portion of the island, utilizing the rugged terrain and ancient Okinawan stone tombs as ready-made defensive positions. Japanese forces on Okinawa also received support from approximately 1,900 kamikaze aircraft attacks against American naval forces supporting the invasion, representing an integrated defensive concept that attempted to leverage all available Japanese military capabilities against the American assault. Marine divisions fighting on Okinawa faced similar defensive tactics to those encountered at Peleliu and Iwo Jima, with deeply entrenched Japanese positions requiring methodical reduction through combined arms operations. However, the scale of operations on Okinawa, combined with the proximity to the Japanese home islands and the desperation of Japanese strategic circumstances, created an operational environment of unprecedented intensity. Japanese commanders' assessments of Marine Corps capabilities by the Okinawa campaign reflected the accumulated experience of nearly 4 years of Pacific combat. Captured documents and post-war interrogations reveal that Japanese officers recognized Marine divisions as elite assault formations, characterized by superior training, equipment, and combined arms proficiency compared to average American Army divisions. Though they also noted that the gap in capabilities between Marine and Army units had narrowed considerably by late in the war as Army divisions gained combat experience. Japanese intelligence summaries noted that Marine units maintained higher levels of physical fitness and aggressiveness in the assault, qualities attributed to more rigorous training standards and the Marine Corps' institutional emphasis on offensive operations. However, Japanese assessments also noted that Marine units, like all American forces, were vulnerable to casualties from artillery and mortar fire, particularly when crossing open ground or conducting attacks against prepared positions. Japanese defensive doctrine emphasized the use of pre-registered artillery fires and the construction of reverse slope positions that forced American forces into kill zones where they became vulnerable to indirect fire weapons. One aspect of Japanese assessments that appeared consistently in intelligence summaries and after-action reports was surprise at the relatively young age and apparent physical vigor of American Marines compared to Japanese expectations. Japanese military culture emphasized endurance and the hardening of troops through difficult conditions and minimal rations, with the belief that such hardship would create superior warriors. Japanese commanders observed that American Marines, despite often being young and relatively inexperienced, demonstrated physical strength and stamina that remained consistent throughout campaigns, which Japanese analysts attributed to superior American logistics and the availability of ample food, water, and rest when out of immediate combat. This observation sometimes generated criticism of American forces as being dependent on material comfort and logistical support, with the implicit suggestion that such forces would collapse if cut off from their supply lines. However, the operational reality of the Pacific War, where American forces maintained naval and air superiority that ensured reliable logistics, meant that this potential vulnerability was rarely exploited. Japanese assessments also devoted considerable attention to American morale and fighting spirit, attempting to identify weaknesses that could be exploited. Japanese military doctrine placed enormous emphasis on spiritual strength and the concept of Yamato Damashi, or Japanese spirit, as a decisive factor in combat. Japanese commanders attempted to understand whether American forces possessed comparable spiritual strength or whether they relied purely on material superiority. Observations from multiple battles suggested to Japanese commanders that American Marines demonstrated high morale and determination in the assault, particularly when operating in cohesive units with experienced leaders. However, Japanese analysts also noted that American forces appeared more susceptible to psychological effects of prolonged combat, with references to combat fatigue and psychiatric casualties that were less openly acknowledged in Japanese forces due to cultural factors. Some Japanese commanders interpreted American concern for individual casualties and the practice of evacuating wounded personnel under fire as evidence of weakness or lack of spiritual strength, failing to recognize that effective casualty evacuation actually contributed to American morale by ensuring that wounded personnel received proper medical treatment. The question of what Japanese commanders really thought about U.S. Marines must also address the ideological and cultural filters through which Japanese officers interpreted their observations. Japanese military culture in the 1930s and 1940s was deeply influenced by nationalist ideology and a sense of cultural superiority that made it difficult for many commanders to objectively assess the capabilities of Western military forces. Early Japanese assessments of American military capabilities often emphasized perceived weaknesses, including softness due to comfortable living conditions, lack of spiritual strength, ethnic diversity that supposedly undermined unit cohesion, and democratic values that were believed to weaken military discipline. These preconceptions, though challenged by operational reality, persisted in various forms throughout the war. Even as Japanese commanders developed grudging respect for American firepower and combined arms capabilities, many continued to believe that Japanese forces retained superiority in spiritual strength and close combat, despite mounting evidence that such advantages were insufficient to overcome American material and tactical superiority. Post-war interrogations of Japanese officers provided additional insight into their assessments of Marine Corps capabilities. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, who died in the closing days of the Battle of Iwo Jima, left letters and orders that revealed his relatively realistic assessment of American military capabilities and the futility of attempting to defeat American forces through spiritual strength alone. Other Japanese commanders, interviewed after the war, acknowledged that they had underestimated American determination and the proficiency of American forces in combined arms warfare. Some officers admitted that Japanese tactical doctrine, developed primarily through experience fighting in China, had proven inadequate against American forces that possessed superior firepower, better logistics, and more effective coordination between ground, naval, and air forces. However, the extent to which individual Japanese commanders accurately assessed American capabilities varied considerably, with some officers maintaining to the end of their lives that Japanese forces had been defeated primarily by American material superiority rather than any superiority in training, tactics, or operational art. The evolution of Japanese tactical doctrine in response to Marine Corps operations revealed an adaptive enemy that learned from experience and attempted to develop effective countermeasures. The shift from water's edge defense and immediate counterattacks to defense in depth utilizing prepared positions represented a fundamental change in Japanese defensive thinking, driven largely by the costly failures of earlier tactics against marine assaults. The increasing emphasis on indirect fire weapons, particularly mortars and artillery, reflected Japanese recognition that attempting to engage American forces in direct fire exchanges was generally futile given American superiority in automatic weapons and supporting arms. The development of elaborate underground fortifications and tunnel systems represented an attempt to nullify American advantages in naval gunfire and aerial bombardment, forcing American forces into close combat where Japanese defenders could inflict higher casualties. These tactical adaptations demonstrated that Japanese commanders were capable of learning from experience and implementing changes in doctrine, even though resource constraints and declining Japanese military capabilities limited the effectiveness of such adaptations. The assessment of Japanese commanders regarding U.S. Marines must also consider the strategic context in which these battles occurred. By 1944, perceptive Japanese officers recognized that Japan was losing the war and that the best outcome Japanese forces could achieve was to inflict sufficient casualties on American forces to potentially influence peace negotiations or delay the final defeat. This strategic reality influenced how Japanese commanders approached defensive operations and shaped their assessments of American capabilities. The goal was no longer to defeat American assaults, but to make them as costly as possible, creating a calculus that emphasized inflicting casualties rather than holding territory. Within this context, Japanese assessments of marine capabilities focused heavily on identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited to maximize American casualties. Even when the ultimate outcome of individual battles was not in doubt, one frequently misunderstood aspect of Japanese assessments concerns the level of respect Japanese commanders held for American Marines as warriors. Japanese military culture placed great emphasis on respect for capable enemies, and despite ideological preconceptions about Western weakness, Japanese commanders who had actually fought against Marine forces generally acknowledged their fighting qualities. Captured documents and post-war statements reveal references to American Marines as formidable opponents who fought with determination and demonstrated increasing tactical proficiency as the war progressed. However, this respect was typically expressed within the context of Japanese superiority in spiritual strength and the ultimate righteousness of Japan's cause, reflecting the difficulty Japanese military culture had in fully acknowledging the superiority of enemy forces without undermining core ideological beliefs. The technological aspects of warfare also influenced Japanese assessments of marine capabilities. Japanese commanders noted American superiority in virtually all categories of military equipment, from individual weapons to tanks, aircraft, and naval vessels. Japanese intelligence reports frequently mentioned the M1 Garand rifle as providing American infantry with significant firepower advantages over Japanese forces equipped with bolt-action Arisaka rifles. The effectiveness of American artillery, particularly the ability to deliver rapid and accurate fire support coordinated through forward observers, was consistently noted as a major American advantage that Japanese forces struggled to counter. American tanks, though not technologically superior to the best German or Soviet armor, were present in quantities that Japanese forces could rarely match and were generally effective against Japanese light tanks and anti-tank weapons. The integration of technology into American tactical doctrine, with extensive use of radios for command and control, forward observers for artillery coordination, and air-ground liaison teams for close air support, represented a level of combined arms sophistication that Japanese forces found difficult to replicate given their more limited resources and different doctrinal traditions. In examining what Japanese commanders really thought about U.S. Marines, it becomes clear that assessments evolved significantly over the course of the war, influenced by accumulating combat experience, changing strategic circumstances, and the inevitable collision between ideological preconceptions and operational reality. Early assessments reflected Japanese confidence in their own military superiority and underestimation of American capabilities, leading to tactical decisions such as the Ichiki Detachment's assault at Guadalcanal that proved catastrophic. As the war progressed and Japanese forces repeatedly encountered highly trained and well-equipped Marine units, assessments became more realistic about American material advantages and tactical proficiency, though ideological factors continued to influence how these assessments were expressed and acted upon. By the final battles at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, Japanese defensive doctrine reflected sophisticated understanding of marine assault techniques and serious attempts to develop effective countermeasures. Though declining Japanese resources and overwhelming American material superiority limited the effectiveness of these adaptations. Throughout the war, Japanese commanders who had actually fought against Marines generally acknowledged them as formidable opponents. Though this acknowledgement was often qualified by assertions of Japanese superiority in spiritual strength and close combat capabilities that were increasingly difficult to sustain in the face of accumulating defeats.